Direct News TV. November 30, 2023. Israel-Hamas War Live News, Mediators push for Gaza truce extension. Egyptian and Qatari negotiators are pressing for a new two-day extension to the pause in fighting between Hamas and Israel. 1 week into the truce, residents in the Gaza Strip remain fearful about what might happen next. The U.S. isn't doing enough to prevent genocidal war on Gaza, analyst Ibrahim Abu Sharif of Northwestern University in Qatar tells Al Jazeera that the United States needs to step up pressure on Israel to prevent it from continuing its war on Gaza. As it stands now, we're hearing the rhetoric from the Israeli leadership they're doubling down on their commitment to going on no matter what, he said. I find that to be highly disturbing, he continued. If we consider the scale of the loss of life, then we have to know that this cannot continue indefinitely. On U.S. Secretary of State Blinken's continued trips to Israel and meetings with Israeli leadership, Abu Sharif said, it doesn't seem like it's moving the needle in any direction. What set the tone was the early rhetoric from the Biden administration that gave unconditional support for what turned out to be a genocidal war, he said. Blinken can try to soften his rhetoric and apply pressure, but in the end, it won't bring back the dead in Gaza. ICC chief prosecutor to visit Israel, occupied West Bank. Karim Khan of the International Criminal Court was invited to visit Israel by the survivors and families of the victims of the October 7 attacks, the court announced on X. Khan will also visit Ramallah in the occupied West Bank to meet with senior Palestinian officials. Numerous nations have called on the ICC to investigate Israel for war crimes over its military operations in Gaza, and several rights groups have petitioned the court accusing Israel of genocide. Khan himself warned in late October that any blocking of humanitarian aid to Gaza could be considered a war crime. At the start of the war, Israel announced that it would place Gaza under a state of total siege. In case you're just joining us, it's 6 p.m., 1600 hours Greenwich Mean Time, in the occupied Palestinian territories and Israel. Let's bring you up to speed on the latest major developments. The Israeli military says 2 released captives have been handed over to its soldiers by the Red Cross. The Gaza Health Ministry says more than 15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks since October 7. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken emphasized the need for Israel to protect civilians in southern Gaza during his meeting with Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu. Palestinians who fled northern Gaza to the south say the truce is not enough and a permanent end to the war must happen immediately. The Israeli PM says he instructed his foreign minister to summon Spain's ambassador for a reprimand after the Spanish PM earlier said he doubted Israel was abiding by international law in Gaza. Palestinian dies from injuries after being shot by Israeli forces. The man was fired on by Israeli forces near Tubas in the occupied West Bank on Wednesday. The Palestinian Health Ministry identified him as 25-year-old Karam Bani Odeh, from the town of Tammun. Israeli forces prevented medics in an ambulance from reaching him, according to the news agency Wafa. His death brings the total number of Palestinians killed in the West Bank by Israelis since October 7 to 248. Abbas urges complete ceasefire in meeting with Blinken. The Palestinian Authority president also presented the U.S. Secretary of State with a comprehensive file documenting Israeli occupation crime in Gaza and the West Bank, including Jerusalem, according to a report in the Palestinian state news agency Wafa. Abbas raised the topic of the forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, particularly in light of increased attackers from settlers there since October 7. He also stressed unity between Gaza and the West Bank, saying that the Palestinian leadership will not abandon its responsibility for the people of Gaza. Israeli army receives 2 captives. The military has announced the 2 released captives have been handed over to its soldiers by the Red Cross. More than 1,300 artists accuse Western cultural institutions of repression. More than 1,300 artists have signed a letter accusing cultural institutions in Western countries of repressing, silencing and stigmatizing Palestinian voices and perspectives. Oscar-winning actress Olivia Colman and Olivier Award winners Harriet Walter and Juliet Stevenson are among the signatories. The letter reads, "We find it deeply troubling and, frankly, indicative of a disturbing double standard that expressions of solidarity, which have been readily offered to other peoples facing brutal oppression, have not been extended to Palestinians." The artists called on the arts and culture sector to call for a ceasefire, stand up for artists who voice support for Palestinian rights and amplify the work of Palestinian artists. The struggle for freedom from racism for Palestinians and Jews is one of collective liberation. We refuse to pit one community against the other and stand firmly against all forms of racism, including Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, the letter added. 2 captives handed over to Red Cross, Israeli Army. Army spokesperson Daniel Hagari says 2 captives are on their way to Israeli territory after Hamas handed them over to the Red Cross. Hagari added in the next few hours additional captives are expected to be released. The 2 hostages were women, a Palestinian official familiar with truce talks told Reuters news agency. Lebanese race to plant crops as precarious calm prevails in south. Villagers who live off the land in southern Lebanon are rushing to sow their crops, making up for lost time after weeks of hostilities with Israel forced them to miss out on the start of the planting season. "I work from this, I produce from this, I live from this," Zainab Suwaiden said as she sowed wheat in the village of Yater, an area hit by Israeli strikes during heavy exchanges of fire with Lebanon's Hezbollah. The UN's peacekeeping force in southern Lebanon said it wants the Gaza truce to hold to prevent further escalation. The concerns of the mission are that, after so many weeks of exchanges of fire, now we have a truce, a moment of calm, but that intensive changes of fire can trigger a much wider cycle of conflict, said UNIFIL spokesperson Andrea Tenenti. "This is the real warning and danger that everyone is facing, not only in the south but in the region. As civilian hostage numbers fall, a truce deal must be renegotiated." Daniel Levy, a former Israeli negotiator, says the current iteration of the truce deal will have to be renegotiated as the number of civilians Hamas holds dwindles. Can one do that in time to extend this cessation without getting back to the intention of the Israeli political and military leadership, which is to resume its all-out assault on Gaza? "They are being clear that that's where they want to go," Levy told Al Jazeera. "The Americans are saying, hey, we're with you on you continuing your military mission, but can you do it differently? That sounds like a disingenuous position to me. Why would anyone have faith that Israel will do this differently?" As Hamas reiterated it will swap soldiers it has for all the Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, Levy said the idea of all for all is polling surprisingly highly among Israelis. But within that agreement, it would have to include some kind of end, decisive end, to Israel's bombardment. Gaza's war-displaced demand a complete stop of war. Palestinians who fled northern Gaza to the south say the temporary halt in Israeli bombing is not enough and a permanent end of the war must happen immediately. Regarding the truce, we displaced people do not benefit from it at all. We are unable to obtain even basic materials, for example, flour, says Samir Yagi from Gaza City. "All people here want the war to stop so we can return to our homes, to see what happened to our families. We have relatives who did not leave Gaza, they were under bombardment. And there is no communication and the networks are down. Are they dead or still alive? Are our homes still standing?" Suha Lubad, another displaced person, said, "We demand there be a complete ceasefire and a complete stop of war so everyone can return to his place, to his work and to the normal life that we have lost." Salem Abu Kumbuz agreed that temporary pauses in Israel's bombardment are not enough. "We do not want a truce for 1 or 2 days. We want to return to our homes in northern Gaza. We do not want to stay in the south displaced, sitting in schools. We have no clothes or blankets, sitting in the rain. Hundreds of wounded need to be evacuated from Gaza," Health Ministry. In an interview with Al Jazeera, the spokesperson of Gaza's Ministry of Health said hundreds of people needed to receive treatment in hospitals outside the bombarded territory. Here are some of Ashraf al-Qudra's translated comments. Israel controls the path of medical aid entering Gaza. The volume of medical aid hospitals received did not reach the desired level. We need to evacuate hundreds of wounded people out of the Gaza Strip to save their lives. We demand the protection of the healthcare system in the Gaza Strip so that it can function. Why are so many Palestinian women dying in the war? The UN says Palestinian women have borne the brunt of Israeli attacks in Gaza. Among the more than 15,000 death toll, 2/3 of those killed are women and children. Al Jazeera's Inside Story examines why so many women in Gaza are dying in the war. My name is Kingsley. Please like, share, subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be the first to be notified whenever we post. You won't regret it.